Thank you for tuning in for today's episode of the Rice Crypto Show. And joining me on today's episode is Charles Hoskinson. He is a pioneer and an innovator in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space. He is the founder of the Cardano blockchain and ADA cryptocurrency, and he was also one of the co-founders of Ethereum. But before we get into it, if this just happens to be your first time ever watching any of my videos, I do encourage you to explore my channel. Make sure you're subscribed, smash that like button, hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date with my videos as they come out. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon channel where I post up exclusive content and it's a way to support what I do directly. I've recently started doing monthly giveaways for patrons only. Follow me on Library where I post up extra content. Check out my audio podcast, Rice Radio, that is hosted on anchor.fm. It's available on every major podcasting platform at Rice Radio. And I've also recently partnered up with Money Metals Exchange. If you go to moneymetals.com, you're a first-time buyer and you buy $100 or more and you use the promo code RICE, RICE, you'll get a free half ounce of silver, and it's another way to support the channel as well. I'm going to have links down below for everything I just mentioned as well as everything we talk about on today's show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining me on today's show is Charles Hoskinson. He is not only a mathematician, not only a co-founder of Ethereum, but he is the founder of Cardano and ADA. Charles, I appreciate you coming on the show today. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Chris, for having me on. It's an interesting day. I'm 3 days into a 7-day fast, and so I haven't eaten since Sunday. It's been a bit of fun.
Oh, wow, that's cool. I've actually been considering doing some fasting for spiritual reasons. Are you doing it for spiritual reasons or health reasons?
Well, it's kind of funny. If you look at most of the world's religions, there's always some fasting component like Lent or Ramadan or these types of things. But I do it mostly for health reasons. I tend to lose a few pounds of fat and detoxes the body and you just feel great, and I've done it so much that I don't even feel hungry. So I haven't eaten anything since Sunday, but I'm not hungry at all.
I wouldn't even imagine. I'd have to try it myself and probably do like a day or two fast and see if I can get used to it and build up that tolerance of not eating or anything like that for a while because I'm so used to it. But
yeah, it's a hormone called ghrelin. That's what makes you hungry. And ghrelin regulation is a lot connected to carbohydrate intake and insulin. And then also it's your body gets used to moderating those levels when you have persistent periods of fasting. The easiest way to start a fast is do intermittent fasting. So what you do is you just skip breakfast and you eat between 12 and 8. Mm-hmm. And then so that's 16 on, 8 out. And you kind of get used to that, and then your hunger levels get more moderated. And then you do what's called a fat fast. So you actually have high fat food, but no carbs, no protein, and use that to do 2-3 days. And then you can go to a complete wet fast, which is just water. So I got these guys right here, the Icelandic, 1.5 liter bottles, and I drink 2 to 3 a day, and that's all I have alongside coffee. That's pretty much it.
Sweet. I love it, man. I mean, you're a pretty well-rounded person. I mean, you're a mathematician, you're an innovator in the blockchain and crypto space. You obviously have a little bit of a philosopher in you, and you pay attention to politics, which I appreciate, and we'll try to get into some of that here in a little bit, but for people who are unfamiliar with you, aside from the fact that you're a co-founder of Ethereum and that you are the founder of Cardano and ADA, who is Charles Hoskinson?
That's a good question. I'm just a guy. I'm 32 years old, and I've tried to live life in a way where if I'm curious or interested in something, I go and chase it. And I never let anybody say no to me. Whenever somebody says, "Oh, you can't do that," or "That's impossible," or "That's just not the way it works," I said, well, why is that? And I keep asking why and why. And about the third or fourth time, you start realizing it's less about first principles or physics, and it's more about social convention or skepticism or cynicism. And so the minute you discover that hidden truth, the magic behind that is that you can change things. So everything I've done, I've always been very optimistic that you can change things. So very early in my life, when I was 21, I said, hey, I'm a big fan of gold standard, and I like humble monetary policy and foreign policy and these things. And then Ron Paul ran for office, and I said, boy, I should get on that train. everybody's always, it's impossible. You won't achieve anything. And there was only like 5,000 people that supported him when I joined. When I left just 11 months later, it was 2 million people. We had the Campaign for Liberty and the Ron Paul blimp and all this other cool stuff. And it created a whole movement, that has had a profound impact on US policy and politics. So I've always been a guy like that, where I kind of go off the beaten path and I don't take no for an answer. I kind of ask, can we do something a little differently? And that's what dragged me into the cryptocurrency space. Because after 2008, after Occupy Wall Street and all these other things, I said, we just can't change anything through the ballot box. You can't vote your way out of this. It's not going to happen. Like if it was going to happen, Obama would have done it. He came in 2009 with a super majority in the Senate and the House. He could have passed a party line vote that we all have to wear hats on Tuesday, and no one could stop him. He had 60 senators. He was the first US president that had that kind of control since FDR in 1932. So he had a golden window to actually have a real conversation about corporatism and Wall Street's control over society. And none of that happened. Instead, they were just squandered. So I said, oh boy, we need to do things differently. So cryptocurrency came around, and the whole raison d'etre of this is own your own money, be your own bank, be in control of your own life. And then what's happened is our movement in the last 10 years has gone from let's just talk about money to let's talk about society, culture, and governance in general. So everything from self-sovereign identity to being in control of your own data and all these other things have kind of like worked their way into the cryptocurrency space. And that's most of the projects I've worked on through my career in the cryptocurrency space have been interconnected to those concepts of be your own bank, be your own identity, be in control of your own life. And how do you actually make these systems work practically and at scale? Because it's one thing to say we have theories and one thing to say we've done an experiment and our 12 friends together, it's all working great. Communism would work perfectly fine in a co-op of 8 people. Maybe you can make that work. No one ever can make that work on a social scale, right? So, and when they try, it's a horrible failure. Well, similarly, these protocols like Bitcoin, they actually don't work so well when you try to put millions or billions of users into them. And if you look at the tail, they're just not going to be successful unless they make radical changes. So a big chunk of my career, now 6 years in this industry, has been asking the first principle scientific questions of what do we need to know to actually get these systems to perform and actually work with 1 billion users. And the biggest reflection of that has been the Cardano project. But my company in general, Input Output, this is what we do. We're as much a scientific research group as we are an engineering company, as we are a commercial entity that goes around and sells stuff and does solutions providing and so forth. So that's basically what I am. I'm just a guy and nothing special about me. It's just I developed a mindset a long time ago of ask questions, be skeptical, and try to establish what is physically impossible from what is socially impossible and know the difference between these two things. And then find ways to convince people that the socially impossible things can become possible with just a slightly different model.
I love it, man. That's so well said. And I didn't know that you had worked or was involved with Ron Paul back in the day. So that kind of makes sense with some of the videos that I've seen. There's a video in particular that really inspired me was a video called The Path Ahead. I don't know if you remember the titles of videos that you make, but it was a couple months ago.
That was right after the market started collapsing due to the coronavirus shutdowns, and I think it was March.
Some very powerful stuff, and I'll have it linked down below. And your knowledge in U.S. history is really impressive as well. What made you decide ultimately that Cardano blockchain and ADA cryptocurrency were needed in the space? And how do you feel ultimately? What do you think separates ADA from other cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, so I started from the solutions side, and then I kind of worked my way backwards to what does my technology need to look like. So I did a TED Talk back in 2014 in Bermuda, and there I talked about this idea of 2 worlds, the developed world and the developing world. And in the developed world, we have bank accounts and driver's licenses and passports, and we have the ability to do business with each other safely, credit scores, we can get a loan when we need it. We want to buy a car, there's a way to do that. In the developing world, all of these things we take for granted are extremely hard and subject to waste, fraud, abuse, corruption, and it creates massive inequalities. Now, these are places that have tremendous natural resources, places that have tons of brilliant, incredible people. So it's not a human capital problem, it's not a raw material problem, it's a systemic problem, a governance problem, a systems problem at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And so you ask yourself, well, why hasn't the legacy world found a way to bridge that gap? Because the way it operates is simply just too expensive. So you can't really get roots if your lifetime cost per customer is higher than your lifetime profit per customer. So you just stay out of the jurisdiction. It's too risky, or it's not profitable, and it's charity. And charity doesn't work in that respect. So I said, all right, I have this idea of economic identity. And let's start from the very beginning, all the way back to your data and to your identity. And let's go on a journey throughout your economic identity life of all the utilities you would need, from peer-to-peer lending to insurance to banking, reputation management, all this stuff. And so then you can put it all into a single slide and make it really beautiful. But basically, I'd like a system that can service those things. Now, the closest system that could actually have an opinion about that would be Ethereum. And this was back in 2015. The problem is that the design of Ethereum is not built in a way that can scale, be interoperable, and they have no inclination to embrace a sustainable model. So what I did is I took those three things, interoperability, sustainability, and scalability, and I bundled them all together, and I said, there needs to exist a system that can do this. So let's define them. So what does interoperability mean? Well, interoperability is saying, well, you have millions of these things that are going to be out there. There's already 5,000 blockchains and tons of legacy infrastructure. So how the heck do you talk to them? The
Right.
Bitcoin people, they seem to have this religion where they say, no, we don't need to, because we're going to win, everybody's going to lose. Then we call that Bitcoin maximalism, and everything else is a scam. That's a road to nowhere. So you have to have practical opinions about the ability to talk to people. Okay. Second, on sustainability, this is the who pays and who decides part of it. So when you normally think about products in terms of custodians, and so Windows to Microsoft, iPhone to Apple, this kind of stuff, right?
Mhm.
But the problem is that when you go to a centralized ecosystem, like, who's in charge? And if you can't decide that, how do you reach consensus on where the money is going to come from to do stuff? And then how do you reach consensus on how to actually change the system? If you
Right.
just, we're going to have custodians do it, well, then suddenly you have the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. They decide for you. It's just like Google with web standards and things like that. It's really hard to disagree with them because they pay for everything and they control Chromium and so forth. So that's a big issue. And we saw the same with Microsoft in the 90s during their height of their monopoly. So basically I said, well, I need some governance stuff. And then on the scalability side, this is just a simple one. Really easy to understand, super hard to accommodate. You want the protocol to get faster or stay at the same speed as you gain more users. That way you can grow to 1 billion users.
Right.
BitTorrent is a great example of this. It's why a third of the internet bandwidth is on that protocol. When you're downloading Game of Thrones, you get it really fast because there's a lot of users using it. When you're downloading Pee-wee's Playhouse, there's probably like 6 people that are, so it takes a long time to get that movie, right? It's not very popular. Similarly, if you have a truly scalable protocol, it can sustain the demands of all those people. None of these things are incumbent in Ethereum. It's not designed for that. It's great as a second generation cryptocurrency where you can finally have a blockchain with programmability. And we saw the whole DeFi revolution and all these things from it. But ultimately, it needs to be replaced. And Vitalik himself is the first to admit that because he's creating Ethereum 2. He
Yeah.
wouldn't be doing that if he agreed that that model was great. And so far, it's taken them years and years and years and years to even have a chance in a philosophy and a strategy to approach that. So back in 2015, we said, well, we need to do something. So we said no preconceived notions. We just had a really good idea of what we wanted to accomplish. We wanted economic identity for those who didn't have it. Those are billions of customers. We had kind of had an idea of the things we needed to have to make a system be able to sustain that at that scale. And then we said, okay, well, where does the science take us? So we spent just 2 years just doing nothing but science, 2015, 2016, and a little bit of 2017. We're just writing papers and having a lot of fun, and there are a lot of philosophy and these types of things. And we said, well, what is a consensus protocol? What does proof of work give you? What is a ledger? We wrote wonderful papers like the GKL 15 paper, and it was accepted at Eurocrypt and has over 900 citations now. It's like the theoretical backbone for blockchain security. And then we built out a corpus of knowledge that basically gave us a blueprint for a system like Cardano that has all these properties, or at least has the ability to evolve to contain these properties over a reasonable period of time. Then we started building, and we chose to build it in a very particular way. So instead of just saying, hey, let's hire some Java developers and go have some fun, we decided to go do it the way that NASA would do it, or do it, the way that, Boeing or, SpaceX would do something. We use formal methods. So we actually wrote formal specifications. We wrote lots of Haskell code. We proved that the code was correct. And this was extremely difficult, especially to figure out how to hire people who had these skills, because there's like 50 people floating around who knew how to do this stuff. So, take your choice of Alice or Bob. That's about it. But we found them and we got them to work. And it took a long time to get all the pieces together. But now the system is waking up and we've been releasing it systematically. So the first release was in 2017. And that was all just about liquidity and introducing these concepts to the world. And then the most recent release is Shelley, and that was about full decentralization. We went from a Ripple-like static and federated system to a Bitcoin Ethereum-like decentralized and dynamic system. And so we just launched that in July, and very shortly we're about to launch our smart contract stack. That is the next major evolution. But in parallel, we're also building the governance stack and interoperability protocols and all these other things. And we'll get it to a point where the system is self-sustaining, and then we'll come and say we'd like another 5 years. And mission accomplished would be for the system to actually be able to pay us for that. So our client is the blockchain itself. So it's been a really fun 5 years in that respect, and I've really enjoyed it.
I like the fact that you have gone through like kind of the scientific method route to make sure that everything is provable, that you're going through peer reviews. I think that's really important, because that's how we've done things in pretty much the rest of the industries in the world. So to add that element into the crypto blockchain space, I think is much needed. I would like to see more people adopt things like that. And you mentioned when Cardano and ADA first started out, and then going into this new era, the Shelley era. The first era was called Byron, and I started looking into that, the naming system, and I found that to be really interesting, because I'm Lord Byron, and then Ada Lovelace, who was daughter of Lord Byron, who's a mathematician. She's also known to be the first computer programmer. She wrote the first algorithm, and then the Shelley thing, I was talking to my girlfriend about this, and she was saying something about Mary Shelley and Frankenstein. So I was thinking Frankenstein, this kind of makes sense. But then I was looking into it, and it was her first
Percy.
husband.
It's Percy Shelley.
Yeah,
it was
who wrote Ozymandias.
Yeah.
So what is your inspiration for the different names that you're using, and how you've chosen this? Because I think that's fascinating from a philosophical standpoint.
Well, each of these people are people that when I was, in college and living life, I read their works. Like, I was a big fan of Lord Byron. She Walks in Beauty is like the poem that you send to any woman that you're courting, because it's such a lovely poem. And Shelley, he was a really cool guy. I mean, he was part of the Illuminati. He was a great writer, a great poet. And then his wife wrote Frankenstein. So it gives you a sense of the pedigree there. But Ozymandias in particular was probably his breakthrough work. And that was a reminder of, no matter how great you are, time won't get its due and things change. And, I felt it appropriate when you go from a static and federated system where a few are in control to a dynamic and decentralized system. And since you're letting go of your empire, you're letting go of your power base, and you're letting the world change and become something different. And even if you build these beautiful monuments and other things, they could become covered in sand if it moves in a different direction. So I felt that was an apt way of naming it. Gauguin is a famous computer scientist, and he was an advisor of one of the people that works with us, Grigori Roshu, and he did a lot of foundational work in the field of programming languages. And we really wanted to get the smart contract model correctly, so we thought he would uniquely be a good model for that. And then Voltaire, he's the ultimate critic and cynic and a critiquer on governance. So if you're going to do something involving governance, he's probably a pretty good guy. Him and Bastiat. Voltaire's a little easier to spell.
Yeah.
I enjoyed Candide. So, I just have fun with it. And we tend to name products after mathematicians and poets and computer scientists. And we try to keep a nice balance. And so anything involving a currency, we tend to name after a woman. Anything involving a protocol, we tend to name after a man. So you have a nice gender balance and these types of things.
That's really interesting, though, and I found it to be fascinating. I like to look into things like that, because it shows that you're putting a little bit more of a personalized touch on it too, and paying homage, which I kind of respect. That I think it's always important that we remind people of the innovators and those that were before us that led us to where we are, because unfortunately some of those people get forgotten in history depending on who the victors are. And that's what I've been learning about American history, is how distorted it is.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some skeletons in that closet.
And I would love to pick your brain about that sometime. As far as what you've created here in conjunction with the rest of the team, I like how you have the CSL and the CCL layers, where that's the is it
The settlement layer, the computation layer. Yeah, let's
yeah,
talk
how
about
does
that.
that work?
Yeah, so and actually this is an old idea from the Why Cardano paper that we released, and we're still moving in that direction. But basically the idea is that you're not going to have one blockchain, one set of ledger rules that's going to satisfy everybody. And so you have kind of like two different dimensions that you look at there. One is saying, is it permanent or is it ephemeral, meaning it goes away after a while? And the other dimension is a dimension of who controls that. So is it going to be controlled by its own consensus system, or is it like a primary secondary type of a deal where there's a master chain and then these side chains basically get their security from that master chain? So this was a logical breakdown of that, the settlement layer versus control layer. And the idea would be you have many control layers and they have all different ledger rules and computational models and these things. So you run different types of smart contracts. So maybe one's like WebAssembly and browser-like or JavaScript-like, and another one's the Ethereum virtual machine, and then another one is a completely radical different model, maybe Urbit or something like that. So we had that idea in 2017, and this is an example of like evolution of research. And what we've noticed in a lot of commercial conversations is that it's probably good enough to have a reasonable level of programmability on chain, and that's what Plutus and Marlowe are about, the smart contract languages that run on that, but a better story about off-chain. So it's not, we're going to run multiple blockchains at the same time. It's going to be, you have your blockchain in your server, your blockchain, your cell phone app, your blockchain and whatever. And that, if you look at the evolution of DeFi and where Ethereum has been at, that's been the predominant model, where you have some dApp, but big chunks of the dApp run off chain, and they run actually usually on trusted server infrastructure.
Right.
So we kind of said, let's make sure we first have a good story about how off chain and on chain work and communicate with each other. That's a super hard story, and that's where Web3 and these other things come from in the Ethereum world. And it's taken them years to come up with a pretty good idea there, and we have a philosophy on that. Now, true to form of that paper that we wrote in 2017 about sidechains, we did develop multiple sidechain protocols and an SOK paper specifically on what you can and cannot do with cross-chain communication. So we have ways of extending and expanding Ouroboros, the heart of Cardano, that it can actually run in a multi-chain model if you want to go down that road. And the first application of that would be using permissioned ledgers as sidechains, and then Cardano as the permissionless system. Where that's useful is in government contracting and Fortune 500 contracting. So let's say you're Ethiopia and you want to have a supply chain system and you want to run all of that as a sidechain, as a permission network, kind of like Fabric or something. But you want those users and the money and the value and the identity, these things that live in that system, to be able to go to Cardano's main network. So that's where your primary secondary thing comes from. Your side chain is the secondary chain, and it runs that application for that jurisdiction. The government has a lot of say and control over how that works, but users of that system can move value to the other system. Where this is really useful is actually in central bank digital currencies, the CBDCs. You might be hearing like, ooh, People's Bank of China is doing a digital coin, the Fed wants to do one or whatever. Yeah. Well, you have to ask yourself, how do you settle between central banks? So the central bank is going to create its coin, but that's going to live on their servers and their blockchain. But then how does Djibouti talk to Azerbaijan or talk to Armenia or talk to Germany? Exactly. You need a settlement layer. And if you go back to the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, is that it's like you've just centralized the whole system. So what if you use a cryptocurrency as the connecting tissue between those permission instances? So this example of what SL and CL is all about, that whole idea that we came up with in 2017, was saying you could do something like that, where those particular instances would be sidechains. They would be controlled by the relevant parties and have their own consensus model and so forth. But then the users and value can freely flow from that system into Cardano's main network into another system, maybe another economy, like the country of Georgia or something like that. And it's been interesting. There's actually other products like Polkadot and Cosmos and Aeon who have since we wrote that paper in 2017 who have actually started exploring that and proposing it and
The
raising money.
parallel chain idea, would that be what
Yeah,
you, okay.
yeah, and co-chains with Algorand and so forth. So it's becoming kind of a standard. Ethereum is actually behind on that, but F2 is kind of proposing that with their whole sharding scheme.
It's yeah, so each layer doesn't necessarily, it's not operating on the same chain. They're just parallel chains that work together and they
Right. And
communicate
in
with
some
each
cases,
other.
one chain controls the other chain. In some cases, they're independent. What matters is your ability to move value and information and
Okay.
data, between these systems. So, for example, if I have FooCoin and FooChain, should be able to send a transaction into Cardano and create wrapped FooCoin. So it lives on Cardano, and then all of a sudden it can access a lot of Cardano utilities like smart contracts and governance and these things, and then send it back. And we've actually even started exploring this topic with other products like Litecoin, for example. We're saying, well, what would we need to do in Litecoin to change Litecoin so it could talk to Cardano and Cardano could talk to it? And then you could send Litecoin into Cardano using the power smart contracts or using the power voting systems or things like that. And then you send your Litecoin back once you're done. So it's a really cool discussion.
Yeah, I wrote down some notes about that. The Litecoin thing. It was like a NIPOPOW or something like that.
NIPA that's a mouthful, right?
What is that?
Yeah, yeah, non-interactive proofs of proof of work. So if you actually really get into like crazy, I'm in a dark closet, like thinking about this for 6 months and not talking to humanity, you start recognizing that there are certain unique properties of proof of work which give you the ability to construct special proofs. And these proofs do two things. They prove existence of the tokens, and they prove non-existence of double spending. So in other words, if you see a transaction with this proof, you'll say, oh, that's real. Those coins are real and no one's tried to spend them before. So the beautiful thing is if the proof is concise, it means that you can actually validate a transaction without the blockchain. So you can do this internally for light wallets, or you can do this externally for sidechains transactions. So for example, once we have this logic installed, you could send Litecoin into Cardano, and then Cardano could understand that that's real Litecoin and it hasn't been double spent, but none of the Cardano nodes would need to have a copy of the Litecoin blockchain to do that. They'd just be able to recognize the proof. And
That's
then
very cool.
similarly, if Litecoin had this capability, Litecoin could receive ADA and we'd provide the proof. And then all the Litecoin nodes would actually understand that ADA is real and it hasn't been double spent and accept it.
I mean, I think it's a really cool idea, and somebody actually was telling me about it today because they knew I was going to be interviewing you and wanted to know, would this be something that would be available for other projects? Like,
Yeah.
is this kind of a test with Litecoin
It's
as
an
a
open
first?
protocol, and we wrote the scientific papers in 2016, 2017. Dionysius Zindros was the primary author on that, and they've been accepted for peer review. And actually, derivative products like Fly Client, for example, have come from NIPA PAUs as a consequence. And it's available for all proof of work cryptocurrencies. So
Okay.
if you're Bitcoin, your Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, whatever, NIPA PAUs will work for you. And it doesn't require significant protocol changes. And we've written several papers on how to do this on Ethereum and how to do this in other systems. And so far, it's received a lot of accolades and excitement. It's just a lot of work.
What about privacy coins and like Mimblewimble?
Yeah,
Would
it
that?
could potentially work there because the proofs rely on characteristics of the proof of work structure, not the privacy characteristics. So it's definitely possible to get it to work on a Zcash or these other things. You just have to think a little bit more about certain elements. Where it gets problematic is when you move from a Nakamoto style proof of work to a sharded proof of work. When you have like a Prism or these types of protocols that are out that are very high performance, there are certain characteristics of them that would ruin that NIPA PAU structure.
Okay, that makes sense. And I appreciate you explaining that. Yeah, you mentioned Ouroboros, which is the proof of stake consensus algorithm. Secures the network, validates new transactions, and it's a way to earn newly minted ADA. So can you tell me what separates Ouroboros from other different type of algorithms out there, consensus algorithms?
Yeah, so first there's the proof of work versus proof of stake comparison. And going back to Bitcoin, it's a religion. So when they talk about proof of work, they say everything else cannot work by definition. It's a scam, it's perpetual motion. We love seeing Adam Back and Tone Vays and
I was gonna
Jimmy.
say, you sound like Tone Vase.
It's a scam. It's a scam. We love seeing these guys say that stuff. It is what it is. So what we did was we were agnostic. Back in 2015, we didn't know. We didn't take a position of proof of stake versus proof of work. We said, what the hell is a blockchain? That's the first thing we got to sort out. So we wrote a paper on that. It was called GKL 15. And it's the most cited paper, I think, in the cryptocurrency space now, over 900 citations from different products and projects. And it's been peer reviewed at top conferences. But basically, that was a really rigorous formal model for what is a blockchain. And then we kind of showed that proof of work creates a secure blockchain. Great. What that gave us was a security definition, because you're saying, well, can you create something that does what proof of work does, but has benefits? You first have to ask, well, what does proof of work do in a very strict formal sense? And so we kind of did that. Then the Ouroboros research agenda has been very long arc. We've published multiple papers. So if you Google Ouroboros, you'll see like dozens of papers, Ouroboros Classic, Ouroboros Prowse, Ouroboros Genesis, Ouroboros Chronos, or, blockchain redux. There's all this stuff, okay? But the point of that agenda was first saying, can you replicate what Bitcoin does? And in any sense, like not even realistic sense, but can you even just do what Bitcoin does without having a proof of work system? And the answer is yes. And that's what the classic paper showed. The problem with the classic paper is that it's not practical for a real cryptocurrency, because it assumes a synchronous model and all this other stuff. So we spent years basically saying, what things do we need to improve to make the system actually practical? So we go from a synchronous model to a semi-synchronous model, regular security to adaptive security, all this stuff, okay, that are meaningful to cryptographers and less so everyday people. But the long and short is, we'd like to do what Bitcoin does, only we don't want to have two properties. One, when the price of Bitcoin goes up, you tend to see a massive increase in the energy consumption of the proof of work, okay? Right. So now it consumes more power than the country of Ecuador. That's not good. And Bitcoin was really successful, like it was in the trillions of dollars, the market cap. It consumed more electricity than Canada or maybe even the United States. It'd be crazy. Second, as the price of Bitcoin goes up, decentralization goes down on the consensus side. Why? Because it becomes an economy of scale game. So first, people who have access to ASICs and subsidized power and big data centers where they can vertically integrate everything, those are the people who win. So when I joined Bitcoin 2011, it was like, we're having fun. I'm going to join a mining pool and use my GPU and this stuff. And we were just mining that way. I even had a mining rig. I had a Crossfire 4 5850 AMD cards with a AMD Phenom board. Great fun, a lot of fun. Yeah. But you can't do that anymore. Why? Because now it's a professional game. So less than 10 pools control more than half of all the consensus power. And most of these guys are private now. They own the ASIC supply chains and they own the power and all that other stuff. So we said, we don't like those properties. So we said, can we do what Bitcoin does, have all the same theoretical properties of Bitcoin, but not have the energy consumption and have the system get more decentralized as the price goes up? And that's a tall order. So basically, that's the point of the research for Ouroboros. And we showed rigorously through a series of proofs, and then later on peer-reviewed conferences, and later on prototypes, later on live networks in production today, that we actually achieved that. And we went from nobody running it, just a few consensus nodes that we controlled and a few others, to 1,200 stake pool operators. And as the price of ADA goes up, we'll eventually have the system open up and have tens of thousands of participants on the consensus side. So the price goes up, you get more decentralization, and then you can run the whole system for about 10 kilowatts of power, which is 1.6 million times more energy efficient at the moment than Bitcoin. And there's incentives to lower power consumption as the system evolves and grows instead of increase it, because it's just a raw cost, but it doesn't benefit you in the consensus protocol. And of course, there are a lot of nuances, like how do you make all those things work? How do you bootstrap from Genesis? Where do you get random numbers from? Those are complex conversations. And we had to adopt a lot of heavy crypto, like VRFs and these other things to get that done. And, that's why you go through the peer review process, because how that works is you write a paper, you submit it to a conference, and people who don't work for you, who don't know who you are, because it's a double-blind submission, read the paper and yell at you. And if you can't answer their questions, they reject it. So the conferences we submitted to, on average, only accept about 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 5 papers. So you have about a 10 to 20% chance of getting it amongst experts from Harvard and Cornell and CMU and Stanford and these places. So it's real hard. So we went to Crypto and CCS and Eurocrypt and these other conferences and got them in. And that's just like level 1. Level 2 is building it. Level 3 is validating it with prototypes in market. And that's what we did. And it's been a long road over 6 years. And we feel pretty confident that we've solved the problem. Cardano is stable. We're at a $3 billion market cap, 1,200 stake pool operators, and they're running the network, about a third of the network right now. And every 5 days, they run a little bit more. And within probably about March, the whole network will actually be in the hands of the stake pool operators and economically stable. And the chain quality is above 98%. So they're doing the job. Meanwhile, we're also super fast. We can process at this base level 150 transactions per second, and we have a very, very low transaction latency. So, with Bitcoin, you take 6 confirmations, it takes an hour. With us, the same equivalent level of security can be achieved in just a few minutes. So it's much, much faster in that respect. And, you get damn near instant settlement for a lot of stuff.
One thing I was trying to look at when I was doing a little bit of research was the block time. I've seen that the time, the way is divided in epochs and slots.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work for versus, block time?
Oh, well, yeah. So that's the system is agnostic. You can set the slot time to be whatever you want. The question is more about propagation delay and other things like that. We had to measure that. That was part of the prototyping process of what could we comfortably set block time at. So your epoch length, you set that, and then it implies a slot time because there's a certain amount of slots per an epoch, at least under the classic model. Prouse works a little bit more elegantly. But basically, our block time's around 5-10 seconds. And, we can adjust that through parameters. And that was set after a lot of network modeling. So basically, we said, okay, what if somebody doesn't show up? That's where the semi-synchrony comes in. So if the slot producer doesn't show up to do the block, how does the system recover from that? And how much drift is the clock going to have, between slot by slot? Because we live in an asynchronous world. Like your clock is slightly different than my clock. And when you look at millions of actors, that can have a catastrophic effect. And actually, this is one of the reasons why Eth2 collapsed recently. One of their test nets is that they actually had issues with the way they were handling time in the system. So it's very involved. But the long and the short is that you can really push it if you want to. Like you could have like second long block time. The problem is that how do you guarantee that that's going to be propagated across the whole world? It takes 300 milliseconds to send a signal around the world. And if you have to have 5 or 6 hops before you reach 95% of your network, that alone exceeds a second. This is why I've been such a harsh critic, for example, of EOS and other projects when they make claims like 500,000 transactions per second. I was like, yes, if that's on your laptop or your desktop computer and you don't have to send signals into a real network, you could perhaps achieve that. But when you get to realistic network conditions in a global scale network, you're not going to achieve that. And actually, Consensus showed that when they wrote a report about EOS, where they forked the code and they tried to replicate what the EOS guys were talking about. So similarly, we thought a lot about the network design, and we thought a lot about how much throughput can you get. And then what you do is you say, okay, the base layer is only ever going to need a few hundred TPS, and that's okay. And then what you do is you have robust layer 2 solutions and side chains, and these types of things can process certain things that are very high volume, but not necessarily very beneficial, like DEXs or things like micropayments and things like that. And you leave the base layer to do more like broad scale settlement or bunching or things like that. So there's a lot of real heavy tech that goes into thinking about this, and architecture that goes into thinking about this. And what you do is you work with partners, So as I said, we built the thing to solve problems. So I go to Ethiopia, I have an office in Addis Ababa. I go to Tbilisi, I have an office in Georgia. There's people there talking every day. And we say, okay, how do we get student credentials on the system? How do we get farmer vouchers on the system? They build it, we put it on the system, and then we get a feedback loop of whether the system can sustain that or not. Is it economically sustainable? You want predictably cost transactions. You want fast settlement regardless of the network strains. There's a lot of competing demands that kind of push that. The beautiful thing about Ouroboros is very modular. So we have a way of handling time. It's called Ouroboros Chronos. We have all these different modules, and each and every one of them was built in an anticipation that we'd need that capability for a certain class of solutions that the system is supposed to offer. And it's just a matter of building and rolling them out as needed. Like, for example, we have an identity stack called Prism, at Tala Prism, and it uses the DID standard, and we're already starting to get deal flow. We have 30 deals in the pipeline to use that, and that'll bring millions of users into Cardano just as an identity service for KYC or for credentialing or whatever, who now also have a wallet and they can use it to spend money and so forth. And so it's a difficult thing to balance all this stuff. I think the biggest intellectual dishonesty in our industry is people try to sell you that they've solved everything.
Yeah.
That couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is no one has solved everything, including us. It's more of a question of, does your system have within it the capability to evolve to meet that need, or can it be interoperable with someone who's already solved that need? You have to talk about it that way. And also, you have to pick and choose your battles. Some things you can never solve. You can't do high frequency trading, for example, with blockchains. It's just not possible. Anybody who tells you that is trying to take your wallet from you. Okay. So, you have to pick and choose your battles. And part of Cardano was trying to flesh all that out and figure all that out in a very rigorous way.
Well, I mean, you've definitely impressed me with like just all the things you said. I mean, like I've been looking into this, everything about Cardano and ADA, and it reminds me of some other projects, but I do like the fact there's a lot of things that separate it and make it very much different. And I hope that we could do another interview where I could ask more questions in regards to what you're doing in regards to Cardano and ADA, because I do want to get into some of that freedom talk here in a moment. But before we do move into that, was there anything else that you wanted to touch on in regards to, or anything you wanted to mention in regards to what you're doing currently with Cardano and ADA?
Yeah, I mean, we have a great communication team. Rod and Tim do phenomenal work, and every month we have a product update. Our YouTube page is just chum full of videos. I think we have over 400 of them now, and I do videos all the time. So if you're interested in the project, the single best thing you can do is to go to the IOHK YouTube page and just subscribe to that. Every week something comes out, and every month we have a product update where we kind of go through what are we working on, what are we doing, and the whole product team is there and they roll it out, and we give deadlines and dates and these things. And there's just so many moving points. Like we didn't even have time to talk about the governance components, which is probably, in my view, the most interesting and fascinating.
Well, we can go ahead and touch on it if you'd like to touch on the governance. I think it's a very important
lot to discuss, but basically we're figuring out that who pays and who decides type of a deal. So it means you have to build a voting system. And you have to build an innovation management system and a ballot system and an audit and oversight system and accountability system and all these other things. And we have great partners like IdeaScale and others that we're working with on that. And we've been writing papers for years at Lancaster University on secure private voting systems that could run national elections in addition to a cryptocurrency. So there's just so much work. I think Cardano is one of the things where you'll find similarities in other projects like the Tezoses or EOSes or whatever in certain dimensions. But then the thing about us is balance and holism. You can't just go build a boat with like half of it finished and go sail, right? Because it'll sink. You need the whole boat or else the structure won't work. Well, similarly, if you want to build a system that's going to scale to billions of users, you have to have some foundational things there. And we tried in each category, whether it be the smart contract language or the design of the network stack or how we approach consensus or how we do governance. In every single one of these dimensions, we tried to have balance, and each feature is interconnected to the other feature. And it'll take you months to dig through all of it. It took me 5 years to build it with a team of 250 people, and we've written 75 academic papers. We've written 1 million lines of code. It has not been an easy product in any sense of the word. Really rewarding, but a lot of work. But you always remember the goal. Our goal is to build something that gives people economic identity, and it can actually do that. And you say, how complicated is the world economy? How much is going on there? So obviously that has to be a pretty complicated software stack to be able to accomplish that.
I agree. I'm not sure if you're familiar with a blockchain, a cryptocurrency called Nexus, or a gentleman by the name of Colin Cantrell, but I'd love to see you guys get into a conversation because you guys have a lot of the same ideals. And I think that as far as innovators, I think that would be a really interesting conversation as far as some of the things that maybe you guys could collaborate on and things to that effect. But you mentioned making the world a better place for everybody. And that's kind of what you created Cardano, a 3.0 blockchain as being, is an internet of blockchains, and combining the peer-reviewed pioneering technology and providing unparalleled security, sustainability to dApps and systems societies, which I think is a really great thing, man. You mentioned, I was looking for where I had written it down.
Well, let's define better, by the way, because everybody says that, right? Like you had Obama with hope and change. You have Trump with make America great again. It's like everybody has these slogans and they have these qualitative ideas. They're like better, great, improve. But no one actually ever tells you what's the test for how you know if you actually made the world a better place or not. And I thought about this for a long time, and I said, I think the fairest, most reasonable, foundational first principles way of defining better is you play the birth test. And so here's how this works.
Okay.
You're going to be born into a country. That's all you know. You don't know if you're a man, a woman, you have a disability, you're super intelligent, rich family, poor family, gay, straight, whatever. You're just born into a nation. That's all you know. At random. The question I have for you is, what country would you prefer? Would it be Canada, the United States, Switzerland, Indonesia, and so forth? So you'd have the obvious ones where you'd say probably not, like North Korea. Okay, we probably wouldn't take anybody, even like Kim Jong-un's son or something, because you probably get fed to dogs. Okay. But then you say, okay, well, what's the difference between Norway and Switzerland and America? Because remember, we're not talking about who you'd prefer to be. We're just talking about random. So you don't know if you're a woman, a man, you're gay, you're straight, you're disabled, or mentally challenged, whatever condition you have. So then your answer to that tells you a lot about your perception of fairness and quality. And then the notion of improvement then with the birth test is, if you look at a country 15 years ago and you compare it today, are you more likely to pick that country today or less likely to pick that country? So for example, Russia during the Soviet Union, probably not so likely. And then they went to a capitalist society and things got a little bit better and things are looking okay, maybe more likely. And then Putin's starting to get really aggressive, maybe not so likely, right? So there's a temporal component, and you say, well, that's social progress or social regression in that respect. Okay. So then the question is, what do we collectively as human beings need to do to improve that across all countries? How do we make the systems better so that the birth test, it means it's more fair, and you have a higher probability of selecting that country or another country or something like that? Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense, and it makes sense with in that video that I mentioned that's called "The Path Ahead," which I'll have linked down below on your own YouTube channel. You said the reason that you got involved in crypto and blockchain was because of the change in a productive, nonviolent way, and to change the way that things work, to give people more choices and power, control over their money, personal privacy, and data. Those are things that really, really struck to me. I mean, from a technology standpoint, I'm really impressed with what the team has created overall, and I'm really impressed with the project as a whole. The different node sets and how that works, the way that there's 3 different company enterprises kind of separate, working together for one goal. I think that's a great thing. But now that I know that you worked with Ron Paul, and then mentioning getting rid of the middleman, the disintermediary, and making them unnecessary and irrelevant. Those are the things that really, really struck me. And those are the things that I think are really important, because right now we're at a really pivotal time in history, and it's time for change, and it's time for people to stand up and unite. And one of the things that you mentioned was that we've lost faith in our governments and the political process being a failure. And now it's time to kind of, I want to get your words exactly. You had mentioned, I can't find where it was at, but it was something about, yeah, I don't know where the note was at, but you get where I'm kind of going at. I really like this talk where you're talking about not necessarily inciting violence or that sort of situation, but just telling people it's time to question where we are, and maybe it's time to continue that democratic experiment. That was what I was looking for the quote.
Right.
Continuing what took place in the 18th century that seemed to somehow, some way, some entity or corporation or group of people got in control, and that experiment got put on pause.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the problem we have right now is that all the checks and balances that we normally relied upon with the initial design of the United States, this is specifically US-centric answer to this, they've been unraveled systematically. And first with the Supreme Court becoming more of a legislative body than a judicial body, they've decided that they can just make up laws if they think they're fair or not. And that's a problem because they're appointed for life and they have no political accountability. So that's why it became so partisan. The other day I was talking to a friend of mine who's a Democrat, and I said, just out of curiosity, because it was right when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, I said, what was she approved by? And he was like, I think almost unanimously. I said, that's true. It was like 97-3. You want to guess Justice Scalia, the super controversial conservative justice?
Mm-hmm.
What was he approved by the Supreme Court by? Do you know the vote?
I don't know.
You want to guess?
The same?
Yeah, 98-0. So both of them are like bookends of the Supreme Court, and they both basically got unanimously approved because nobody back then really took it so seriously. They didn't look at the Supreme Court as this great legislative body that fixes the wrongs in society. There's certainly cases where they had done that, but that wasn't their primary mandate. So that whole thing is broken. Then it used to be that senators in the United States were elected by the states. They were not elected by the people of the states. So that was a check and balance of the federal government where the senators would basically act in the best interest of their constituency, the governor and the House Assembly, not the raw popular vote. So one of the first things that Woodrow Wilson, the progressive movement, did is that they changed it so that senators were elected by popular vote. So they just became basically like a super congressman as opposed to what they were supposed to be, which was a check and balance to the system of federalism. Okay. And there's hundreds of things with the rise of American bureaucracy, the rise of the military industrial complex, its permanent standing armies and the defense industry that have basically eroded away at the original set of checks and balances that we have. And what happens is even if you are well-intended as a presidential candidate and you win, the system will work against you in every single capacity and way. I'm not a fan of Trump. But he's the first true outsider we've actually had as president ever. He's the first person we've ever elected as president who never held office or military position before.
Right.
In the history of the United States, 44 presidents, all of them had prior political office, were part of the system. So this complete outsider came in, and it was a great opportunity for the American people to take a step back and unify. On the Democrat side, he was a Democrat for over 50 years. All they had to do was work with him and negotiate with him because he's more liberal than conservative and doesn't give a shit about Roe v. Wade or any of these other things. He's not really drinking from that well.
Right.
And he wanted an infrastructure plan. He wanted a new healthcare plan. And if they just gave him credit, he'd basically let them write the bills. And the Republican Party was very loyal to him. But instead, it became an all-out war, like he's a hostile contagion from day one. Investigation, scandal. He can't even ride in a car now with COVID and it not be a fucking scandal.
Right.
Even though the people driving the car wearing the same thing the doctors do when they go into the ICU, which is also hermetically sealed. Come on. Everything is just a war and it's politically disingenuous. And we've reached a point where we're at a tipping point with our institutions, our media, our faith in government, where we are being told by the mainstream media Trump is down 18 points. And if he wins the election, it's over for them because no one will ever believe anything they say, whether there's evidence or facts behind it again. Now, if he loses the election, he has taken the position that the election is broken and rigged.
Mm-hmm.
So no one will believe on his side that the election was fair. And they'll think it was voter fraud that caused him to lose and it's mass collusion. What does this mean? It's pushing us towards a civil war. It's pushing us towards society decaying. And then you ask yourself, well, what is the solution for all of this? I look to the left and they have this woke religion where there's a great book on it called Madness of the Crowds from Douglas Murray. I'd highly recommend reading where he systematically walks through how damaging this philosophy is. But basically identity politics, Black Lives Matter, all of these types of things. And you say, oh, what does that even mean? It all goes to Marxism. It's all like, let's just basically create a Marxist government to make everything fair. Take money from Peter to give to Paul. If Bob is black and Jane is white, we need to rebalance the scales because institutional racism, all this stuff. And they create all these terms like white privilege and fragility and these things. And if you actually look at where they come from, almost all the people who wrote about this stuff are Marxists or socialists. And it all comes from that well of postmodernism. So there's a lot of problems in that philosophy because no American really wants that. But they're not aware that when they put these people into power, it's pushing us towards that. And then when we start getting pushed towards that, we wonder, why are we having Chaz in Seattle? Why are we having Oregon on fire? Why are we having all these mass protests and destruction? And then, coronavirus accelerated it. So
Yeah.
you had the government and the media tell you this is the worst disease we've ever seen since the Spanish flu. And if you get in a large gathering, you will die. In fact, they're doing this with Trump, with the White House event that they had for Barrett. Okay, but then Black Lives Matter is totally okay. Millions of people can take to the streets, densely packed, and then we're just going to pretend like they're somehow immune to that.
Mm-hmm.
And they think the American people are stupid. Like, we're not going to see this enormous contradiction where one gathering is okay, but another gathering is not okay. If you're burning the church down, that's okay. If you stay going to the church, that's not okay. So this is the perception of the right. And the perception of the left, because they've been indoctrinated with this woke religion, is that the right is evil. Everybody on the right it's not, I disagree with you. You are a Nazi. You are evil. Everything about you is hate. You are a white supremacist. You're a racist, a sexist, homophobic bigot. Okay?
Yeah.
Got to a point where when Joe Rogan said, hey, I'll do a debate for Trump and Biden, and Trump agreed, I went on my Twitter feed the day I saw it, 5 minutes after I saw the tweet from Trump. And I said, my prediction is within a little while, we're going to see somebody on the left say Biden can't do it because Joe Rogan is a racist, sexist, homophobe. The View, the day after, they said, no, he can't accept that debate. We can't give a platform to a racist, sexist, homophobe, Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Joe voted for Bernie Sanders. Joe's a liberal, for God's sakes. I mean, he's a comedian. And so you see this guy, he's got 20 million people doing long form podcasts like what we're doing, having real straight up conversations with everybody.
Yeah.
He can't do a debate. No, because he's these labels. So how do you reconcile when the right looks at the left and says, these people are leading us to a road to Marxism, and that's a government that kill 100 million people. And the left looks at the right and says, these people are Nazis. And if we keep them in power, they're going to descend us into fascism and create death camps, and all the minorities are going to be destroyed and so forth. And the truth is somewhere in between. Both sides have problems, significant, real, meaningful problems. And there's a corporatist underbelly to all of this where big companies basically in the shadows run things. So my whole point about the video I made that you keep referencing was that saying, look, we're on a crash course to civil war if we leave the status quo. And that never works. No matter, the 1930s, Germany had this issue. It was either going to be fascism or communism. Hitler won, so it was fascism. And in Russia, it was either fascism, monarchy, and brutal dictatorship, or communism. Communism won there. Both cases horrible for humanity.
Yeah.
Or we can do something different. And we go back to first principles, and we say, what fundamental rights should we have? What level of privacy should we have? What level of control should we have over our lives and our autonomy? And we start there. And anything that disagrees with that is a bad institution, and let's get rid of it. And then once we've done all that, and we've decided how society should be, the government looks really different than left, right. There's no traditional Republican or Democrat anymore. It's a whole different system. Everything is completely new and unique. And you personally will have more power. I'll have more power, but then we can still achieve great things like environmentalist policy for global warming stuff, or regulation of AI and CRISPR and these existential threats that if we don't figure out how to deal with them will end the human race. We can still take care of those types of things, but we can still have a government that preserves liberty, and it doesn't descend into China and social credit, or, Mussolini in Italy, or these
Right.
things.
Yeah, but the real big question is, yeah, and I'll come back to it, but it's how do we get there? And you've spoken about, we know that blockchain and crypto are tools to help us opt out, and opting out is a way, but that's not going to bring forth the change that we need to reevaluate our relationship between ourselves and the government, to decide what is moral and just, and to decide what rights we have to stand up and to unite. What is it really going to take to get to that point to where we can start changing the things? Because we're not in a position now at this point to do any of that. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, because this is something that's become very near and dear to my heart, about trying to let people know that when enough people take a stand, that when we stand united, nothing can stand against the people, and we can effectively change the world, but we're just divided.
Right. So you have to be very foundational. It's the first and foremost thing, and our education system destroyed this on purpose. because it's great for politicians, bad for the American people. Critical thinking. It's the foremost thing about all of this. So I created a series of videos where I said, think for yourself. And, Corona is a great litmus test on people's capacity to critically think. And there's so many things floating around there. So you cannot be controlled if you can think critically, because what you're able to do is evaluate the things that people are telling you, the evidence that they provide, and differentiate fact from fiction, opinion from reality, and be able to navigate those waters. The problem is the human brain is built in a way that it's very vulnerable to a litany of attacks. Okay, so we're not so good with statistics. We're not so good with exponential growth. We're not so good, dealing with long-term things versus near-term things. There's all kinds of biases where, we tend to have confirmation bias, where we remember the decisions we made and we forget the mistakes. We look for evidence, where for our, at least like anti-vaxxers, for example, do this, where they'll find that one person had a bad deal with vaccines. That's the case for everybody. Right. Okay. So the problem is, because we don't have good critical thinking skills, we are having a lot of trouble as a society navigating the fact that we have more information today than it's the totality of the entire human race combined. And every 18 to 36 months, it doubles. So you have a lot more information. You have a deterioration in our ability to correctly consume the information. So how do you actually know what's real? Like, for example, deepfakes are the single biggest threat, in my view, to democracy if they get to a certain threshold. Because here's the reality. I can make a video in 10 years that shows the US president committing pedophile acts, or your favorite senator beating his wife, or whatever. And you cannot distinguish that from reality. And then you can just stage it with like what the Russian media does, or these other people do, and just release it through 4chan or something. Say, it's a scandal, hidden video discovered. Now, if people are having a hard enough time understanding basic things today and sorting fact from fiction today, oh my God, how much trouble are you going to have when your capacity to make misinformation and propaganda is pushed through?
We're going to be lost.
We are outsourcing critical thinking to the social media platforms, the fact checkers. And they say, well, this has been proven false by PolitiFact or this organization and so forth. So now we just basically decide these three ministries are the ministries of information, and they get to decide what's real and what's not real and who works there. These people are 25 years old with liberal arts degrees in California. They get to decide what's real in medicine, what's real in physics, what's real in here and there, and so forth. And now they're even creating problems where if you don't believe the orthodoxy, you can go to jail. That's where hate speech legislation comes from.
Right.
And all these things, like UK, for example, with the anti-trans movement, people who speak out against that, they can actually be arrested in some cases, or they run into huge problems. And so you think, how close are we here? You see, so critical thinking is the single most important part, and that's foundational. Build the ability to be skeptical, and when you're looking at information, weigh it out and ask yourself, is this really true or not? I have to do this every day as a CEO. I hear hundreds of things, often contradictory from many different people. This guy is getting listed on Coinbase. This thing is happening. This thing is happening. Just things in our own domain. And then, perhaps things I hear about my competitors. This guy had an affair with this person, and this is going to become a scandal or whatever. For example, I heard when I was in Wyoming, and I don't know if it's true, but I heard it. When I was in Wyoming Saturday last week at University of Wyoming, someone came up to me and said, I heard it. It's very reliable. Trump has corona. Now, this was 5 days before, actually 6 days before he announced it on Thursday. So when he told it to me, he was a pretty credible person who told it to me. I took it seriously, but I said, no, I don't believe that's true. And then I saw him at the debate, and he's like, he looks okay, sweating a little bit, probably on Adderall, who knows. And then on Thursday, he announces he has the corona. And it's like, wow, okay, well, hang on, this fact pattern is really interesting. So, what do you do with this information? So you need a processing system, a methodology. And the good news is there's hundreds of books on this and videos on this, and philosophers do this all the time to digest information. Okay, then once you have the ability to do that, you have to actually ask yourself, what do you believe is fair? That's the most fundamental thing, because here's the thing. When you have a disagreement with somebody, it's usually not about the facts. It's about values. You both are right because you have different values than the person you're disagreeing with. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, the abortion debate. If you believe life begins at conception, Your viewpoint is you're murdering someone if you conduct an abortion. If you believe life does not, your viewpoint that that's a medical procedure. Now, if you had the same values, one way or the other, you'd probably agree. And there would be no debate whatsoever. But because there's a value difference, then you say, okay, well, hang on a second, we can't agree. We're just not going to. So the point of critical thinking is it helps you get to a point where your values are more objective and less subjective. They don't come from God. They don't come from what my parents told me or my boss told me or whatever. I've sat down, I've thought about it. I've looked at various things, and maybe I'll take divine command theory. Maybe I'll take this, but at least you have a defensible position, okay? Once you have a values core, you really know what you believe in. Then, and only then, are you actually prepared to have a conversation with another person. Because then when you're talking to that person, you can listen to them. There's a great book called How to Have Impossible Conversations. And it gives you like 35 tips on how to talk to people who radically disagree with you. Okay. You're black and you're talking to a Ku Klux Klan member, probably a big gap there, right? And there's actually a black guy who does do that. And he convinces people to leave the KKK, and he's been very successful. They actually give them their uniforms after they leave, and he has a whole closet full of them. Okay. So how to have these impossible, it's possible to do that, but you can't have them until you know how to think and you have your own value system. Okay. Then we have to look at society as a whole, and we look at the century, not today, the century. And we say, okay, for where we want to go for the 21st century, what are the goals that we as a human race need to aspire to? What standard of living do we want to have? What type of planet do we want to leave our great-grandchildren? What type of technology do we want to have? What type of wisdom do we want to have in society, and so forth, right? Start with the end. Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's one of the habits. I think it's like number 2 or something. I think one is proactive. The other one, start with the end in mind. You work your way back all the way then after you go a century out, and you say, what is the governance structure we need to accommodate that? John Locke talked a lot about the trust, and he said, how do you have the trustor, the trustee, the beneficiaries, and these types of things. So the government is a trust for the people. What powers does it need to have, and what is our relationship for it? And what do we demand of it for accountability? We live in an age, not the 18th century, but the 21st century. So real time at any given moment, you can see where every single dollar your government spends goes. You could not do that in the 18th century, which is why they didn't put it in the Constitution. But damn, today we can. So you have to ask yourself, what is the transparency and the accountability and these types of things? And you work your way through it. Then power structures, who should govern us? Term limits, different voting systems, preference voting, for example. Why the fuck do we have to make a choice between Trump and Biden? Why can't we have 5 people or 6 people on the ballot and you pick your preferences? And you, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, like last election, maybe Trump, then Clinton, then Gary Johnson, and then another person, Gary Johnson, Clinton, Trump. Why can't I do word accounts or Condorcet counts and so forth? Basic stuff like that. There is 200 years of political science and voting theory that exists that we're not using at all in the American system. Once we know how to think, we know our values, and we've already decided as a society where we want to go, then it's a question of how do we build the right system to get us there. Now, you notice none of our political systems set up this way. It's who do you put in power, and that person in power will tell you what to do and figure it all out, take us there. We don't instead talk, look, we could have a debate where it's Trump and Biden, instead of saying, Trump, you did this wrong, explain yourself. Biden, you did this wrong, explain yourself. You could have a debate where you say, okay, guys, let's talk about where you agree on healthcare. Let's start there. What are problems you both agree? Could they do that?
That would be an interesting conversation to make opponents that are running for office to, instead of debate, figure out what their common bonds are.
Exactly, because then you're trying to actually solve a problem. Like if I ran a corporation, I run companies, 250 people. I don't open a meeting with, all right, well, we have some sides here. There's Alice and Bob. And Alice, tell me why your side is right. Bob, tell me. We start with a common problem for the entire room. We need to ship Shelley. We need to ship Gauguin. We need to write this protocol. We need to write this code. How do we get it done? What are the processes we should have? What can you live with, and so forth? And there's tons of systems like sociocracy and holacracy and other things that exist for this. But the point is you get the people in the room, and at least let's agree on values. What are common values we hold? And let's agree on solutions, or at the very least, what are the problems we're trying to solve? We don't want to do that, because by doing that, you actually are accountable to do it.
Right.
What you want to do is say, if you vote for me, you get your blowjobs and your cure for cancer, and everybody's going to be driving Lamborghinis. And you vote for them, and in 4 years' time, you're going to be, living in Mad Max, and it's going to be chaos, and you're fleeing through the desert against the ghetto boys. It's like this is what we go through every 4 years, and it's just hate and demonization. Chris, I'm tired. I'm so fatigued and tired. After Trump got corona and went to the hospital, seeing what the media did with that, it just got me so exhausted. I'm done. I can't do it anymore. I watched the debate. I can't do that. I watch this. I can't do this. And I think most of the American people are tired. So you asked your question. This is my very long-winded way of answering it.
Oh, I love it, though.
Change. You just ask them one very simple question. Are you tired and frustrated? And they'll say, yes. And then that is the road to change, because you say, look, there's a long road you're going to have to go on for us to get to a real solution. But if you want to take it, we can show it to you. You know what? Not everybody's going to be ready for that, but that's okay. You know how many people were behind the American Revolution when we started it?
Very small. It's like 2 or 3% people that actually won the revolution for the Americans.
Exactly. Much more people were royalists than colonialists. And, we still won that. Why? Because it was the tireless minority that did want to go down that road and forced the world to go down that road that got it done. So you start with critical thinking, you do the values, you agree on common values, you look to the end and you say, where do we want to close the century? You work your way backwards, and then you say, what governance system do we need to get us there? And how do we know it's working, and how do we hold people accountable when it's not working? And then very quickly, you will see a radically different governance structure than what we currently have. And by the way, blockchain does play a role there, in that it is the truth engine. It's your auditability. It's your timestamping. It's your immutability. It's your faith in elections. It's your ability to not manipulate the ledger. So at any given time, the records you're looking at have not been changed for political reasons and so forth. It's not the only thing, though. It's useless. Blockchain's in the hands of China. Would you entrust them to American democracy? No. So it's just a tool. Like a scalpel's a tool. I can give a scalpel to a world famous surgeon. I can give a scalpel to a 16-year-old on meth. I mean, come on.
Right.
It's the same tool, but in different hands. And so it's the same situation here.
I mean, I really love the way that you're looking at this, changing your thinking, get your values straight, look at it from the end and work yourself to the beginning. But the only thing I kind of disagree with that on is I don't know where we would agree from working to the end to the beginning to figure out the solution to then take the action to make the change. It seems like we would just be trying to figure out the solution and arguing about what we're going to do.
Because then it becomes a business problem. And that's exactly what we do every single day at Microsoft and Google and Apple, and every single day in management theory. Every corporation has a goal. They say, we want to make money. We want to be in this market. We want to build this product and so forth. You can have goals. We want to be able to have our entire country be alternative energy. Now you say, well, hang on a second here. There can be multiple solutions proposed, and that's true. And they then are sorted through by feasibility and values and risk. And that's where the hard conversation comes from. And that's where you need governance from. So the very next thing you do is you say, what type of government can actually get the right people in the room, have that kind of conversation, and be able to solve the problem? Let's look at Corona as a great example of that. No matter where you sit on that spectrum, it's the worst disease humanity's ever encountered to it's just the flu. There's a whole spectrum there, okay? Wherever you sit, let's solve it. So you can probably list down certain things that needed to get done. We need to develop therapeutics for it. We need to develop a vaccine for it. We need to clean up our PPE supply chains. We need to make sure medical equipment is available. We need to make sure the doctors are trained. We need track and trace. We need testing. These are all requirements, okay? So then you ask yourself, well, who should be in the room to have that discussion? Each and every one of those boxes have domain experts who've been doing that, nothing but that, for their entire careers, and have multi-billion-dollar companies who do nothing but that across the globe. And it's not just our problem, it's the world's problem. So if you have a good governance system, it should be able to bring a group of people together in each of those buckets to come up with a plan. And then there'll be infighting and all this other stuff, and there's common values and not so common values. But at the end of the day, consensus arrives, okay? Then the leader at the top picks the best options from each bucket, puts it together as a consolidated plan, and says, this is what we're going to do. And then you go and talk to the other countries and you say, this is our plan. What do you like about it? What do you hate about it? And you repeat the process. Within 3 weeks of debate and deliberation, we could have come up with a global plan with the right leadership and the right people in the room if you had the right governance structure. Instead, it's China bad, WHO is the worst thing ever, Europe is stupid, we're great, this person's great, oh, no. And then Trump killed 200,000 people. I'm sorry, does the 10th Amendment not apply? It's like, what, he's a dictator and he can just tell all the states what to do? When he said he was going to lift the lockdowns, they said he couldn't do it because of the 10th Amendment. But he can be a dictator and tell them what to do? Yeah. It's insanity. It's just political propaganda because it wasn't about solving the problem. The left said, this is the best opportunity we're going to get to bury this guy and take power back. Blue wave coming. So let him go and flounder. We're not going to help him at all. And then Trump, he's just an egotistical guy. He has no idea how to actually manage. Okay, he's a terrible manager. It's evident with how he handled this whole crisis. He could have easily done exactly what I said just by committees and bringing these people together. And each and every one of them proposed something and then bring a bipartisan group together and say, we're not going to leave. I'm not going to do any business in the government until this gets done. Now, the other thing is, why do we just have one president? It's like even the Romans had two leaders. They were called consuls of Rome during the Roman Republic, and they were equal. There was two of them. So you have to ask yourself, why is it in a country as big, vast, and complex as us, we elect one guy every 4 years to take care of everything? The Swiss have a committee. There's like 7 people on it. Mm-hmm. So why the fuck don't we have a leadership group as opposed to one guy running the whole show and these types of things? Right? These are questions you ask when you start with the end in mind. You work your way back to the governance structure because you imagine these scenarios. What if a plague happens? What if a war happens? How do we resolve existential issues where we don't have total control? Like, let's say we discover China's building an AI and we legitimately believe that AI is going to end all humanity. Is it okay to preemptively strike and go to war with them to stop them from doing that? And would our governance structure have the ability to do that? These are hard questions. But you know what? There are dudes and gals who spend decades of their lives and have PhDs in this topic. They don't give a shit to think about this. The Rand Corporation and Council of Foreign Relations and this other thing. So you call them up and say, let's play around with it. You know what? You'll have a beautiful thing in 6 weeks to 8 weeks and so forth. And by the way, the whole population under this assumption can think for themselves. So when you propose it, they don't just drink that water. They ask critical questions. Why are you doing it? What's this all about? Hang on a second here. This guy has too much power. Why does he have that power? The U.S. was founded this way. The Constitutional Convention, the best and most educated people were there. Mm-hmm. And every single one of them, they spoke multiple languages. They all knew their Latin and their Greek. They'd read all the great books. They understood the failures of Greek democracy. They've read about the Peloponnesian War. You know, when we talk about Thucydides and the Thucydides trap, they knew Thucydides through his original book that he wrote after Athens lost. Okay, they knew that shit. Okay, so they go in this room and they say, how do we build a great government? And they were very critical of each other and checks and balances. And some people wanted a king and some people wanted total democracy. And it was a compromise solution. And as imperfect as it was very powerful. Well, similarly, we could do the exact same thing here, and the general population will have their values set and their critical thinking ability, and they'll only accept it if it's reasonable. And you build it and you measure it. That's the last part about it. So you say, are we achieving our goals? We know where we want to be in 2100. We know what's on track, what's off a track. Are we actually moving towards that? Or are we stalled for some reason? And if we're stalled, why is that? You intervene. Maybe it's a leadership change. Maybe it's a systems change. Maybe the goals are unobtainable because of new facts that you've discovered. Or maybe something sets you back, like a war or a plague or something like that. But at least you have a productive conversation, because the election is no longer about Trump, Biden. It's about, why are we not achieving this? State of the Union is different then too. It's a PowerPoint presentation, and you have your 12 things or 15 things, and you talk about what have we achieved and where are we going and so forth, and how are we moving towards that. And then people are asking questions. Why are we failing here? Why are we failing here? We've been doing this for a long time in the corporate world, and it's allowed us to achieve all the trains, the planes, the automobiles, the rockets, the cell phones, all these things, everything we have, the microphone you're talking on is a product of this system. But then on the governance side, we pretend like this system doesn't work, and we go back to who's the king. And we don't like the king, go kill the king and replace him with the next king. And the next king will be great. The 78-year-old guy with dementia, he's he's going to do such a better job than the 74-year-old guy who's a reality TV star. They got this figured out. Trust us.
Now I see why you came out in support of Brock.
Yeah, I'm so done with all of it, man. So I say again, just ask them if they're frustrated, and that's like it's like the cults at the airports. Do you want inner peace? Are you happy?
Yeah. I love it, dude. And I mean, really, we got to have more conversations like this. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It kind of sucks that I divided it up and didn't get to spend as much time like focusing specifically on Cardano and ADA, but I really felt like this was an important conversation that needed to be had as well.
Right.
I'm trying to research a lot of what we need to do as individuals, whether it's changing our political status, forming state assemblies, whatever the situation might be. I'm trying to learn from people like Anna von Reitz, Christopher James, Carl Lentz, David Straits. I don't know if you're familiar with any of these names, but I've been interviewing and talking to a lot of these people. And I think that pulling together some of these resources and pulling together some of these people, like you were talking, like I didn't really think about it the way you did when you said, if you put the right people in the room, we can get this done very quickly. I'm thinking about everybody's going to be arguing, but what you said makes complete and total sense. So, I mean, that's why I like having this conversation and kind of getting your point of view. And I know we've been going for a minute, so I do respect your time, man. I'm going to follow up with Michael and try to schedule another interview with you in another couple of weeks to schedule out for another couple of weeks. So we'll wait about a month or so in between if you're available, but I really appreciate your time, man. I really enjoyed it. Was there anything that you wanted to add before we finally wrap up this beautiful conversation?
Yeah, I think one final point is, despite all the struggles we're going through, I'm ultimately an optimist. I get so criticized for this, and anybody who's an optimist these days in doom and gloom, they get picked on. But, if all things considered, the human race is getting better and things are moving in the right direction. There's a great book called Enlightenment Now from Steven Pinker. And it talks about just a cross-section of the human race from 1900 to 2000. Every measurable category that you care about, it's gotten better. And that's a direct consequence of what we've known and what we've done. So all the problems we have are solvable. All the things that ail us, we can deal with. It's not an issue of morality. It's not an issue of ignorance. It's just an issue of systems. And that's a beautiful thing. Because if it's an issue of morality or ignorance or stuff that divides us, maybe we can't solve it. One group has to kill the other group off. It's like the Homo sapiens killed the Neanderthals or something. There was a dominance hierarchy there. But this is not the issue. It's like, we're human beings. We all can get along. We all talk to each other. The least interesting thing to me is a person's gender, race, or sexuality. I don't care. I care about their story. I care about their merit, where they came from, and what they do and what they bring. And unfortunately, there are philosophies that are brewing that say that is the most interesting thing. And if we're only focused on that, we will never achieve anything. Because it's all about how do we take the pie that we already have and cut it up, instead about where do we want to go and what is fair and what is a society that we'd like our grandchildren or great-grandchildren to live in. So this is why I'm in the cryptocurrency space, and I built things like Cardano, and we focus so much on economic identity because we can practice what we preach. We can go give diaspora an identity system like the Rohingya or refugees from Sudan or things like that. And then suddenly we can do a cross section and say, is their life better today than it was 10 years ago? And then I can go to Davos and other places and show that and say, the stuff I'm doing is having real impact, and here's the evidence for it. Let's talk about how do we make that more global. And you know what? If they ignore me, then just get all the poor people into the system. And in 50 years, there'll be rich people. And then because they're rich, powerful people, the rest of the world has to compete with them. And the only way to compete with them is to become them. That's why America won the Cold War. We had a better system. Yeah. So to compete with America, you had to become America. One of the most stunning things for me was being in Vietnam. I'll tell you the story and then I got to go. And I flew into Ho Chi Minh. And I get out of the airport terminal. And to the left of me, there's a Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's a Popeyes, I think. And then to the right of me was a Domino's Pizza. This is a country like, yay, communism. We bombed them for 10 years. And then we kind of let it go. And then capitalism came in. And now there's a fucking, Popeyes and Domino's franchise right at the damn airport. And everybody's yay, capitalism, right? Even though they're officially communist. So systems doesn't matter what your philosophy is. If you have the right system, it will take over time. So the key to winning is to get to that foundational right system, and cryptocurrencies are part of that. They're not complete. There's this thing called necessary but not sufficient. You need more, but they are a fundamental component to that. And as long as we keep that alive and keep it brewing, and we get more adherence into the system, over time we'll have an army. And then at some point you reach a critical mass, and you don't need anybody else, because that critical mass will become more powerful than the rest, and then people will want that, so they'll adopt the new system. Just like communism failed because capitalism was so much more prosperous and people wanted that, and that system failed.
Dude, I really love your viewpoints. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing the wisdom. I will have links down below for everything, including the Cardano website, the IOHK YouTube channel, and your YouTube channel as well, and other social media links. And I look forward to our next conversation. And as always, I encourage everyone to be the change by practicing change. And I love you all.